Oh,
Oh,
there
there
we
she
are.
is.
Okay, well, finally. Sorry about this.
Where do you join us from, Lynn?
I'm in Sedona, Arizona, where
Ah,
we've just
okay.
had a very unusual snowfall. So it
Oh,
looks
wow.
absolutely beautiful. We have red rocks and pine trees and white snow and blue sky. So,
Wow.
yeah.
Great.
How are you, Martin?
I'm doing very well.
Good.
And I'm in Istanbul in Turkey,
Oh,
and Heidi is in Italy. So this is a really
yeah.
international call today.
Wonderful. All right.
So
So
we
whenever
don't hear you,
Heidi's
Heidi.
ready, yeah.
Can you say something, Heidi? I don't think we hear you.
Okay, yeah,
Oh,
can
Oh,
you
yes.
hear
now,
me
now
now?
we hear
Yes,
you.
we do. All
Okay.
right. I think we're set.
Yeah, we finally managed it, but I don't think
Yeah.
it's the right platform to use. So,
No. It's more difficult than the others I've used.
yeah. And so next time I will go back to the other and try to resolve the problem. So we have now spent 6 minutes with
Yes.
technology. I'm so sorry for that. So I hope the live viewers won't be disappointed and won't have gone away already. So we want to talk about the benefits, let's say, of chronic illness. And Lynn, you are our guest today, and I would ask you to present yourself a little bit, what you think people should know about you, and then we dive into the subject, into the topic.
Okay. Well, I come at the issue of chronic illness from a lot of different directions, mostly as a caregiver. My son has been severely ill for 32 years, and several other members of my family have had a number of illnesses. I also, as an administrator, I worked at DePaul University and I started a program there for students with chronic illness because the traditional disability office had trouble dealing with the kind of problems that students with illness present, which tend to be unpredictable. They were used to solving problems at the beginning of the term, but not being able to deal with the ups and downs of the illness. So I managed that program for 7 years. And then right now I've been on the boards of several illness organizations. And right now I have a company with my husband and I'm offering a series of courses in chronic illness. And Martin, you're jumping all over the place. I don't know what is happening here, but we leap
No,
from you to your computer to it's pretty distracting. So,
nothing I can do about it.
okay, you can't turn off your video?
Well, I
No?
can
Yeah,
turn off my video, of
Yeah.
course.
yeah, but this is sort of boring also. Anyway, the technology is not what we want. So
No.
that's really what I'm sorry that you get it. It's good that you are clear and you are the main guest. And when you will speak now more longer, I will put you on full screen, and so people will see you completely.
Okay.
So about your course, you are starting one in a few days, and I
Yes, this
think
is the fourth one in the series. It's about illness as a path to growth. The other courses were about illness and disempowerment, illness and trauma, illness and relationships. And this time we're going to look at how it is that one can use this really difficult situation to promote personal growth. So that's the course that's starting soon, starting on the 5th, actually.
so. Let's go into this concept. What is good about illness? Normally, people don't want to be ill, and I certainly don't want to be ill. And what what can you tell people when they meet with an illness? Because normally, I think the idea is, oh, let's fix that, go away of that. I don't want to have it, and try to avoid it. So, what can you tell them?
Well, absolutely agree with you. Nobody wants to have it. Nobody invites it. It's a real trauma when comes into somebody's life. Severe chronic illness requires a whole shift in lifestyle. So I would never say don't try to get rid of it because anything people can do to make themselves healthier or to overcome the illness is what they want to do. But my perspective is, if you have the illness and you're living with it, um, I want people to see it differently, because people are regarded often by others as being kind of in a backwater of life. They're not really in life. They're over there being sick, and people who are ill often see themselves that way. And I would like to reframe that and suggest that people can see themselves, that illness is just as valid a life path as, say, being in a corporation or being a parent or being an artist. There's so much to explore and so much to understand and so much wisdom to be gained from this situation. People are forced up against a lot of the really important questions of life. And it's easy to distract yourself when you're feeling healthy. Oh, just work a little harder or have a little more fun or something. But if someone's ill, they can't do that. The question is right in their face. And so that's why I see it as such a path to growth.
So it is about accepting that you have it first, and then
Yeah. Yeah,
so
I mean,
is it
that's an issue. I mean, there are many, self-acceptance is one of the things we talk about in this course because it's very hard to accept. Um, who wants to accept the fact that they can't do what they used to do? So there's a process that goes on. There are many different stages of dealing with illness. At first, there's a crisis, and there's trauma, and it's not a time when you can really probably be thinking too much about what you can gain from illness. You're just trying to cope. You're trying to get your life in order. But it's later. It's people who have had illness for a while and have come to some kinds of accommodations for themselves, some kind of self-acceptance, things like that. And then I think it's time to start exploring what that world is. There's a woman named Laurie Edwards who wrote a book called In the Kingdom of the Sick, uh, which I think is a beautiful term. I think she got it from Susan Sontag. I'm not sure. But I think it describes, there is a kingdom. It's a different world that you enter. It's not the same world. And you can't keep trying to make yourself be in a world that you're not in. So exploring this world has I think I've met many people with illness as a result of the work I've done, and there seems to be, not everyone of course, but a lot of people have a really great depth of wisdom, compassion, understanding, and things like that, more than the general population in my experience.
Martin, yeah, if
Yeah.
you want to say something, I would interfere still a moment. This is that what you mean with spiritual growth? That we have to we cannot run away, or better not to run away, but observe it and be in it and with it.
Yeah, I think that's conscious aging, and it's the same thing. When we're aging, we can't stop that. We have to come to an acceptance, and it's very difficult for some people, I think, to accept that they're growing older. It's difficult for all of us at some level or no, but if we can realize that and then try to mine what there is in aging or in illness, the lessons that it can teach us and the wisdom that we can gain. Yeah.
So I wanted to ask, when you talk about development, personal growth or development in
Yes, well, I use the integral model. I've been a student of integral since 1993, I think,
Mhm.
and it's informed just about everything I've done. So, in the integral model, there are two vectors of growth. One of them is to grow up, to mature, and the other one is to wake up or to become
Mhm.
spiritually aware. And in this course, we're going to talk about growing up, which also involves the spiritual line, growing yourself up spiritually. And in the next course, we'll talk about awakening
Mhm.
as an aspect. So I'm treating those two vectors differently in different courses. But yes, and so the focus this time is on how can you develop your wisdom and your compassion, your your capacities for growth. How can you move through these stages of development from a very egotistical, self-oriented position to one which is much more oriented to the world as there's a less ego and more compassion, more wisdom. So we're going to talk about those kinds of growth, and we're going to talk about it in different domains of development. There's cognitive development, there's emotional development, there's moral development, spiritual development. So we're going to talk about all those different ways that we grow, the processes through which we grow, practices that we can use that are particularly related to illness. This whole course takes the integral theory and relates it directly to the experience of illness.
Mm-hmm. And so what are some of these practices that allow people to grow?
Well, I would say practice meditation, first of all. And that's something ill people can do. There are many things they have trouble with, but meditation is actually a really, really good practice for someone who is ill because it can be used at any time, in any position. You can lie down and you can meditate. And meditation has been shown to have a lot of physical benefits as well as spiritual benefits and personal growth benefits. So that's the first practice. And there are many variants on that. The practice of Tonglen is one about taking in pain and giving out love. That can be used to help people. Yoga Nidra is another one, which involves, I'm not terribly familiar with that. When I go into practices I don't know something about, I bring in videos or audios or writings by other people, but Yoga Nidra is something that can help the body. There are various practices, communication types of practices, we space practices, which we actually talked a lot about in the last course. So yeah, there are many different ways, and there are growth practices for transformation, for when you move from one stage of development to the next stage of development, it's often because you are either pushed because you can't solve the problems you're in. It's called a disorienting dilemma. And you're faced with a disorienting dilemma, and there are no answers with the meaning-making structures that you have. And so you start looking for some other way to answer this question. And that often propels growth. So chronic illness is filled with these disorienting dilemmas. I use the term koan of illness because illness is a koan. It's a puzzle to which there is no answer. And all of the questions that arise through chronic illness have no answers. Why is there suffering? Why am I suffering? Why is it I can't get well? These questions don't have answers, but then this is another practice. By raising these questions for yourself and holding them close, different things appear, different ways of seeing appear than you might have thought of before. And those help to propel your growth. So that's one way to look at illness as a growth path, is using some of these practices, looking at your own personal koans. What are the big questions that you have? Big question for me all my life is, what the heck is going on here? That's the sort of question that you can have whether you're ill or you're well. So looking at, and you can look at, simple practical questions. How do I manage an illness now that I have it? And what's the best kind of treatment to get? Those are practical questions. They're not koans, but they're also questions that we look at.
I wonder, so I don't know really people who have are they disabling or debilitating chronic illnesses? I mean, I was just thinking, have these people more time to read or to introspect or to learn in a way about their illness?
Well, it's an interesting question.
Or do they have less time because everything, that maybe is easy for us without these illnesses? We can, do you get my question?
I get your question. It's a good question. I'm glad you asked it. because there are these two sides to it. People think, well, oh, you're home. Well, why don't you just learn Spanish and you're off time, or just write a book or do something like
Yeah.
that. But the
Yeah.
reason people are not working and not out in this world is because they can't do that. Often they can't sit up, for example, for an extended period of time. They can't use a computer because the light or things can have trouble. They
Mm-hmm.
have constantly interfering symptoms that, like blinding headaches or something like that. Most of the people in my courses tend to be very ill. Not, it's not hay fever we're talking about here. It's
Mm-hmm.
something, substantial that really interferes with their life. So one would think they would have more time, but actually they don't have more time. They don't have more time for doing, but they do have more time for introspecting. You raised that. So,
Mm-hmm.
and often what happens is the mind goes wild when it's left alone. People are very often isolated, and rumination. Somebody said that the way to be unhappy in your life is through self-focused rumination. And
Mm-hmm.
it's very difficult when you're alone and ill not to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it's hard for all of us not to do that,
Yeah.
but it's very difficult. So I think, practices that can help us move away from that self-focused rumination and into a more healthy observation of the mind and various things like that.
Mm-hmm. So, so the people who you usually work with, it's not that they have like diabetes or something like that. So they cannot lead normal lives. I mean, diabetes is a chronic illness, or I mean, there are chronic illnesses that are not debilitating, right?
Yes, there are, although diabetes.
So we're not talking about these kinds of chronic illnesses.
Well, yes, I would say yes, we are. I mean, people
Mm-hmm.
have varying degrees of capacity to work and live, but to me, anybody whose life is severely affected, and a person with diabetes often finds their life very severely affected. Other
Mm-hmm.
people don't see it. That's another thing about these illnesses. They tend to be invisible. So somebody with diabetes may continue to work, but after work, they're dealing with all kinds of medical problems, and there are things they can't do, things they can't eat, um,
Mm-hmm.
side effects of medications. So, yes, I would say anybody whose life is significantly affected by illness.
Uh-huh. Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It is online. It's online. So we have people from all over the world in the course. Yes, that's right. And we set it, I set it, the calls, we have a once a week call at 1:30 on Sunday afternoon so that Europeans can be on in the evening. And one of my students is in New Zealand and she can be on in the morning. So we do our best. I don't think I can manage the Orient, but uh, the rest of the country, the rest of the world, we try. But your question, that is a really, really heavy question. Yes, there's a lot in the New Age that says you create your own reality. You brought this illness on yourself. If you only got over your anger at your father, or you were a more spiritual person, then you wouldn't have this illness or all this sort of stuff. Which in my mind is probably one of the cruelest things you can say to a person who is really ill.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever you believe, it's still a cruel thing to say because obviously in this day and age, people who are sick read these things and they work like mad on themselves. Everybody I know has these questions. Did I cause it? What can I do? How do I get out of it? Is it my mental attitude? These people, they see what everybody else is and they know this. And the answer in many cases is no, they cannot change it. And I think this point of view, if you're familiar with the quadrants in the integral model, and I'll just briefly say what they are. These are four ways to look at our lives. One of them, this is the upper left quadrant, is interiorly. What are my thoughts? What are my emotions? What are my beliefs? What's going on with me inside? And then on the other side is what's going on the outside? What do the tests show? What is my behavior like? What are the things in my environment? All those kinds of objective things that we can say about our body, what diet is good for me, and that kind of thing. So um, then the other two quadrants involve the collective form of these interior and exterior. So the interior of the collective is the assumptions and beliefs of the group. So you'll see that in advertising, you'll see that in things like this New Age belief it's a cultural belief set. And then the other objective side of the collective is the systems that we're in, like the hospital system and the insurance system and all those kinds of things. So people who are sick have to deal with all four of these quadrants. They have to deal with what's going on inside me, what's going on with my physical body and with the world around me, what's going on in the group that I'm a part of, whether it's my family or my religious group or my country or whatever. And then they have to deal with the systems that they're involved in. And these are often in conflict, for one thing. They aren't the same thing. Often medicine deals with the right-hand side, with the objective, with the systems and all that kind of things. And whereas the person is I'm feeling sick, but the tests don't show that I'm sick. So how do we balance these two? And this cultural idea that we create our own reality. Yes, and I think Ken Wilber has a great way of looking at this. He says we don't create our own reality. We create our experience of reality. And that I absolutely believe. So what we have is things happen to us. We can have a car accident or we get divorced or whatever. Something happens to us. The question is, did we cause that? No, I don't think so. I think it's really egotistical to think that I personally am affecting this enormous world. There are a lot of things that happen out there. But the question is, how do I relate to what happened? So I get divorced. Do I sit around for 10 years and moan and groan and try to get that relation back? Or do I say, all right, I can learn something for this and I move on? I'm not saying, what people should do, but that's the question to ask yourself. How am I relating to this? So if I'm sick, how do I relate to my illness? What I have a responsibility to take care of myself and do the best I can. I have a responsibility to my internal self to try to make that as healthy as I can. So I think we don't want to give up the idea of creating our own experience and working with our interiors, because yes, that is important. But I don't think we want to blame ourselves or blame other people. And that's the way I see that this belief set is often used. It's a kind of spiritual club, and it's used to beat people who are doing their best to try to survive, and then they're told that somehow there's something wrong with them. And I don't think you could find a person in the world, sick or healthy, who doesn't have, their own particular set of neuroses or their own, poor attitudes or whatever. We all have them, and we have them when we're well, and we have them when we're sick. So I feel pretty strongly about this, as you can see. Yes.
Mm.
No, and I think people get confused because in some ways we change our experience. So for example, I mean, if I want to have a red car, I'm going to start noticing red cars in my environment, and it may be possible that I'll notice one that's affordable. And so I bring that red car into my environment. And people take that and they think, oh, I created the red car. No, you shifted your attention. You shifted your attention to what it is you needed. And then often that may help. So if with illness, you shift your attention to, I'm going to be really open to various ways of handling my illness, not just one, then new things will come into your life and you may find solutions that are helpful to you. However, I don't see that as I created my health improvement through some magical way. It's actually through a very practical way if we do. Yes. Yes.
Well, I
Cool.
make myself
There you are.
visible again.
Yeah, and you
And I
seem to be.
try to calm my mind down so this flickering goes away because
Yeah,
it's
well,
caused by
you're
my
creating your
disturbed
reality.
mind. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. So, so as I mean, this was really wonderful what you just shared. Thank you for that because um, my daughter had been when she was 8 or so. She had a benign little cancer tumor, and I
Mhm.
shared it under tears in a spiritual group. And the first person who said something. So, what kind of thought does this young girl have that caused her to get that cancer? I mean, I was like so pissed at that person.
Yeah, I think
um,
Wilbur says that in his book Grace and Grit.
yeah,
Excellent book if you read it. And
yeah,
he
yeah,
and Trey, I got really tired of that.
yeah. Yeah, actually, that's one of the few books I brought with me to Turkey,
Oh,
Racing Grid. Um, so the other thing that came up for me about 30 years ago, I started to develop severe panic attacks.
hmm.
And at the time, at least in Germany where I lived, nobody knew about panic attacks. And obviously they were created because I just overworked myself. I was burning out and had stress. So to an extent, my mind was creating these panic attacks. And then through other genetic training, which is kind of like a German form of, a German guy developed that, Schultz, of self-hypnosis and meditation. Over years, I worked myself out of that without medication.
Hmm.
So we could say that was a semi-chronic illness for
Oh,
quite
yeah.
debilitating for a few years. And it was created by my mind. There was nothing wrong with my physical body, and it was also healed through my not so it was more like a coincidence, right, that I just got into that whole self-hypnosis and meditation practice through that. And of course 30 years later I still benefit from that because that's when my spiritual practice began. So can you say about something about illnesses that
Yeah.
are mainly created by the upper left and then affect the right upper right quadrant, the body, the mind
Yes.
really making the body sick, and
Yeah, well, it
that's
goes both ways.
yeah.
I mean, we can through a lot of unhealthy mental habits create physical illness in the body. Yeah, I would absolutely say that that can happen. And then the solution does come from that upper left. Then that's where you want to go for your solution if it's an upper left.
Mm,
But for example, panic attacks can appear in people with adrenal problems. And they
mm,
have nothing to do necessarily with the fact of stress. So in that case, they need to seek an answer in the upper right quadrant. They need to seek
mm,
something that will help the adrenal gland. So I think identifying where the problem comes from. People can get sick from their families. They can be living in such a very stressful family and situation
mm,
that it can make
mm,
them ill. And so the answer there is, leave the family or everybody get counseling or do something like that. So I think identifying where does my illness come from,
mm,
what is causing it, and most illnesses have something of both. It's rare that one is just located in one quadrant alone. So I think anybody who has a physical illness is very likely to develop depression, anxiety, a number of other um, what are called mental illnesses, because
mm,
when you sit alone, for hours in the day and you can't work and you can't do this and people are telling you you've created it yourself, that's a pretty stressfully
yeah, yeah,
miserable situation.
yeah.
So then you're going to start developing emotional and psychological difficulties
Mm,
that
mm,
wouldn't perhaps have been there without the physical illness. Or you can have you can create problems, for yourself. Just simple tension can cause mechanical problems in the body. So if the tension is the problem, then you develop the physical problem, but then the physical problem can go on to be a problem in itself.
Yeah.
That isn't always healed by the upper lip. So it's very complex, a lot of interweaving, and I think what's important is to see the complexity, is not to jump to one solution or the other. The conventional medical approach is always, well, we just have to fix this particular problem physically and we'll solve everything. And that's insufficient. But the other side, which is that it's all about your interior, that's also insufficient. We have to look at all four quadrants, what's going on. Maybe the medical care is terrible. Maybe the system is the problem. Maybe you're living in a third world country and the hygiene is bad and you can't get a decent doctor. Well, people are going to get sick. There are going to be epidemics, and that's a system problem.
Yeah. My daughter is a doctor in the Bronx. I mean, she's still in her residency, and she has a degree in Africana studies. So I know from her a little bit. She studies how being Black basically influences illnesses, which have been long attributed to the skin color of these people. And now we find out more and more it's really the social conditions and the belief systems, partly, that they grow up in, that causes a lot of the higher rates of certain illnesses that Black people have versus white people, which has nothing to do with their race. It's all about, or mostly socially and culturally constructed. It's very interesting.
Yeah, well, you can just look at diet. Certain people are raised with very little understanding of what a good diet is, and they can develop a lot of physical problems by
or even having access to healthy food.
Yeah, right.
Money-wise and stores in their neighborhoods and things like that.
Yes, if all you have is convenience stores, what are you going to eat? Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's very complex. All of these factors do influence each other, and I think each of us, when we have an illness, have to look at that. Have to look at all of the quadrants. How is this affecting me? And what can I do in each quadrant? Because there might be something you can do in each quadrant that will help. Maybe you can't cure the illness, but you can make yourself feel better, either emotionally or physically, or you can find better treatments and you can get a better relationship going with your family. So any of those things is going to help you.
Yeah. So coming back to the growth and more the spiritual awareness, do you attribute that kind of awakening or growing to focusing more and more on the interior and the actual miracle of being alive despite having the chronic illness?
Yeah, I saw a video by a young girl and I was so impressed by it. She had a very serious illness and actually died, I think, not long after she made the video. And her point was, she said, I love my life. Don't think of my life as not a good thing. I love my life. And I thought everybody has a life and they can love that life. And you can be whoever you want to be in whatever circumstances you are. That's your choice. Who do I want to be in the circumstances? What I can do may vary from situation to situation, but who do I want to be? So when you start asking questions like that, you're getting into the spiritual realm, the personal growth realm. So, do I want to hold this resentment? It's not healthy. And so, do I want to be a person without resentments? Even though I mean, people in general with illness, I have seen absolutely horrendous treatment. People are abused. They have plenty of reason for resentment. But the question is, do I want to carry it, even though I have a lot of reason for resentment? So, that takes you, when you start asking those kinds of questions, that's where I think the wisdom starts to come. When people are able to set aside resentments that are really justifiable, that any one of us would find it hard to live with. Yeah. Now, there's a real kind of growth in a person who can do that.
So in the end, we can only surrender, to once we accept the reality that cannot be changed, and then we can either continue to oppose it, right, and fight it, which would be the non-spiritual path, so to speak, or we can surrender to it and accept it, would you say? And then that goes in layers towards
Yes.
more acceptance of.
Well, there's an acceptance, but I don't think you stop looking to you still keep working in all four quadrants. You're still going to keep looking to make yourself better. I don't think
Yeah.
you just surrender in the sense of giving up, and I know you didn't mean it that way.
No, I didn't mean it
No,
that way. Yeah.
but I think I want to make sure people understand it's not
Yeah.
giving up on yourself, and because amazing things do happen. And with medicine the way it is now, I mean, a lot of things are going to happen, so we have no idea. But it is accepting and surrendering to the moment. Right now, I am in the situation I'm in, and yes, and then there are layers of that, as you point out. You can go deeper and deeper and deeper, and questions like, what does it mean to be human? And illness. Another thing that I want to bring out is 50% of people in the United States have a chronic illness. And it's
Wow.
not just minor. It's so hidden. It's an aspect of life. There's so much about, let's only think about the positive and let's all be healthy and we're all part of this Pepsi generation. And they just ignore the 50% of people who aren't. So why don't we bring that into our experience? Just like aging. Aging is a part, we don't want to shut old people off in homes. It's a part of the human experience. We don't want to shut ill people out of life. We want to say, you're part of life. You have something to teach us. You have something here. You're exploring. I often think if before we come into life, if we get a choice and somebody says, okay, who wants to take on advanced cancer? And some brave soul raises their hands and everybody cheers them. And then when they come back, they get a ticker tape parade. That's what I think how we ought to look at ill people. They are, they're climbing their own Mount Kilimanjaro. They're their own ultra marathoner. It takes people as much effort in a day, sometimes just to feed themselves, as it does for somebody to, climb Mount Everest. And I think that's just ignored. The challenges are so great, and the effort that people can put out is so great, and it's just not seen.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. That's a really good point, because people don't want to ask for help. They feel like it puts them in a one down position, because so much of our society is about status and things like that. And so if I have to ask for help, then I'm beholden to that person, or I'm obligated, or I'm weak. There are so many of these internal messages that have come through our culture. So yeah, asking for help, that's a big one, a very big one for people. Yeah. None of us wants to be, put in a position where we can't get up and exercise our own will. I mean, just the few times in my life that I had a serious illness and I'm in bed and the room is a mess. And I want it clean, but I can't get up and do it. And so, do I ask somebody else, or do I feel like I'm imposing, or will they do it right? All of those questions are just, I can't imagine how frustrating that is to have it day after day. The illnesses I've had have been limited in time. So even if the room was a mess for 2 weeks or something, I could live with it. But Yeah. Well, there's so much that needs to be done on a societal level because I mean we do ignore it and we ignore it in such a ridiculous way. We're all going to get old. Most of us are going to get ill. So don't
Mm.
we want to have places where we can go if we have to go somewhere that are, give us dignity and give us capacity to control what we can and treat us with kindness. But it's very convenient to forget that when you're 30 and healthy. It doesn't, doesn't loom large in your life. But then there's the spiritual side of it as well, which is recognizing that we will utterly lose control. At some point, we will lose control of our own destiny. I mean, some of us die quickly, but a lot of people don't. And they become less and less able to direct, the course of their own affairs. So how do
Mm.
we deal with that? That's aging brings that on, illness brings that on. Yes, and people justify that with this, I think, false view of positive thinking. I think positive thinking is a really great thing to engage in, and there are many, many practices in that. But this idea, and how this can be spiritual, I don't know, to cut out half of life. Let's
Mm.
cut out the whole negative side of life. Well, spirituality is about everything. I mean, is God in everything, or is God only in the good? I mean, what? And then what do we do with the bad, or however we want to define our spirituality? What do we do with the negative? Is that all going to disappear somehow if we cease to look at? I mean,
Mm.
I have trouble with that. I think we have to look at everything in life, everything, and we can find beauty in it. There is beauty in suffering, oddly enough. That sometimes if you go to the extremes of suffering or watching somebody, to love someone who is suffering, there's a kind of a beauty in that. And I don't know how to explain that, but that's been my experience. Okay. Yes.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah. Oh, that's okay. That's all right. It was good practice. Yeah, we'll do it again. I'm happy to do it whenever you want.
Mm.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Heidi. It was a pleasure
Thank you
talking
for
to
the
you.
work you're doing. That was very inspiring for
Oh,
me.
thank you. Thank you, Martin.
Look at
Yeah.
that through a integral lens.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Oh, I think there's a lot to talk about. Yes, we will. Okay. All right. That's okay. And I'm so No problem.
And now,
All right.
and now my image is stable. But
Yes, there you are, finally.
uh, uh, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. All
Okay.
right.
Thank
Okay,
you,
bye.
everyone.
Thank you all.
Bye bye.